Walk into any GM dealership service department and ask them about lifter failure on the 5.3-liter V8 and watch how fast they steer you toward a $4,000 to $7,000 engine teardown. What they will not tell you is that the entire problem starts small and it starts cheap. I have been a mechanic for over 2 decades and I have pulled apart more collapsed lifters on these active fuel management engines than I can count. Here is the truth nobody at the counter wants you to hear. 4 parts, all of them under $40, will stop lifter failure on your 5.3-liter V8 before it ever starts. Let me show you exactly what they are, but first you need to understand why these engines eat their own lifters, because once you understand the mechanism, the fixes make perfect sense. The 5.3-liter V8, specifically the Generation 4 and Generation 5 engines with active fuel management and later dynamic fuel management, was designed to shut off cylinders when you do not need full power. The idea was fuel economy. On paper, it works. In the real world, it created one of the most predictable engine failures of the last 20 years. When active fuel management deactivates a cylinder, it relies on special collapsing lifters and a component buried in the valley of the engine that controls oil flow to those lifters. When the oil is dirty, when the pressure is wrong, or when that valley component clogs, the lifter collapses and does not come back. It either floods a cylinder or wipes out the camshaft lobe underneath it. That tick you hear at idle is the warning shot. By the time it gets loud, you are already looking at a teardown. Let me explain what actually happens inside the engine, because this is the part the service writer glosses over. On an active fuel management 5.3-liter V8, 4 of the 8 cylinders can be shut down. To do that, the engine uses special 2-piece lifters that are designed to collapse on command. Oil pressure, routed through a part called the lifter oil manifold assembly, is what holds those lifters in their normal state and what tells them to collapse when the computer wants to save fuel. So unlike a normal V8 where the lifters just ride the cam and do their job, these lifters are being asked to mechanically transform themselves thousands of times a day, and every one of those transformations depends entirely on getting clean oil at exactly the right pressure. The moment that oil supply gets dirty, thin, or inconsistent, one of those collapsing lifters fails to return to its proper shape. When that happens, the roller on the bottom of the lifter stops following the camshaft lobe correctly, and within a short time it grinds that lobe flat. Now you have a wiped cam, metal in your oil, and a repair bill that buys a used car. That is the failure chain in plain English, and I want you to hold on to it, because every one of these 4 parts is designed to break that chain at a different link. Now, here is what drives me crazy. Every single one of those failures traces back to oil and oil flow, and every single one of them can be prevented with parts that cost less than a tank of gas. Let me walk you through all 4. The first part is the cheapest and the most important, and almost nobody changes it on the right schedule. It is your oil filter, but specifically the right oil filter. The 5.3-liter AFM system runs on oil pressure. Those lifters are hydraulic, and the AFM solenoids that feed them are extremely sensitive to oil contamination. When you put a cheap economy filter on this engine, you are gambling with the one fluid that keeps those lifters alive. A genuine AC Delco PF63 or a high-quality equivalent costs around $12 to $15. The bypass valve in a quality filter opens at the correct pressure. The filter media actually traps the fine particles that clog AFM solenoids, And the anti-drainback valve holds oil in the system so you get pressure the instant you start the engine. That last part matters more than people realize. Every cold start with a failed anti-drainback valve means a few seconds of those lifters running dry. Do that twice a day for years, and you understand why the failures cluster around high-mileage AFM trucks. I tell every customer with a 5.3-liter engine the same thing. Change this filter every 5,000 miles, no exceptions, and buy the real one, $12 now or $7,000 later. That is the entire math of owning this engine. I want to add something about bargain filters that most people never see because I cut them open in my shop. A low-cost filter often uses a cheaper paper media with looser tolerances, and worse, a rubber anti-drainback valve that hardens and cracks over time. Once that valve fails, oil drains back into the pan every time the truck sits overnight. So your most vulnerable moment, that cold first start in the morning, is the exact moment those AFM lifters are getting the least oil. A real filter holds that oil right at the engine, ready to go. I have torn down ticking 5.3-liter engines and found the only difference between them and a healthy one was years of cheap filters and stretched out oil changes. $12 is not where you save money on this engine. The second part costs even less, and it is the single most overlooked component on the whole engine. It is a quart of the correct oil weight with the correct certification, and specifically, I am talking about running a true Dexos-approved full synthetic in the viscosity GM actually specified, which on most of these is 0W20 or 5W30, depending on your exact year and application. A quart runs you around $7 to $9. Here is why this is not just oil company marketing. The AFM lifters and the solenoids that control them were engineered around a specific oil viscosity at operating temperature. When you run the wrong weight, too thick on a cold morning or too thin once it is hot, the oil pressure at those AFM solenoids drifts outside the window the system was designed for. The lifters do not collapse and reinflate cleanly anymore. Over thousands of cycles, that inconsistency is what kills them. I have seen trucks come in ticking that had nothing wrong except somebody dumped in whatever conventional oil was on sale because it was cheaper. Dexos certification is not a suggestion on these engines. It is the specification that keeps the AFM system functioning the way it was designed to. The full synthetic also resists the thermal breakdown that creates the sludge and varnish that physically clogs the AFM oil passages. This is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy for a V8. And let me be clear about why conventional oil specifically hurts this engine, because it is not snobbery. Conventional oil breaks down faster under heat, and the AFM system creates a lot of localized heat in those tight passages. As conventional oil cooks, it leaves behind varnish, that brown, sticky film that coats everything. In a normal engine, a little varnish is ugly but harmless. In an AFM engine, varnish builds up inside the narrow oil galleries and screens that feed the lifters, and it slowly chokes off the flow. Synthetic oil simply does not varnish the same way. It holds its viscosity longer, it stays cleaner, and it keeps those passages open. When you pair a Dexos-approved full synthetic oil with a real filter changed every 5,000 miles, you have taken away the two main ingredients of an AFM lifter death: dirty oil and clogged passages, for the price of a couple of fast food meals. The third part is where most owners have never even heard the name, and it is arguably the most direct fix for the actual failure point. It is the AFM pressure relief valve, sometimes called the oil pressure relief valve, that sits in the valley of the engine and controls the high-pressure oil feed to the lifter oil manifold assembly. On the Generation 4 engines especially, this valve and its screen are a known clog point. When it gums up with varnish, oil delivery to the AFM lifters becomes erratic, and that erratic delivery is precisely what causes a lifter to stick collapsed. The replacement valve itself runs around $15 to $25 depending on the source. Now, I am going to be straight with you about this one because accuracy matters more than hype. Replacing this valve is not a 30-second job like the others. It sits under the intake on most applications, so it takes some labor to get to, and if you are paying a shop, that labor is the real cost. But the part itself is dirt cheap, and if you have any wrench skills or you are already in there for an intake gasket or a knock sensor job, swapping this valve and cleaning its screen is one of the smartest preventive moves you can make on a high-mileage AFM 5.3 liter. A clean, properly functioning pressure relief valve keeps consistent oil pressure feeding those lifters, and consistent oil pressure is the whole ball game. Here is the practical way I tell people to handle this part because I do not want anyone tearing an intake off for no reason. If your truck runs clean and you have always used good oil and filters, leave it alone until you have another reason to be in there. But the day you do an intake gasket, a knock sensor, a valley cover, or any AFM delete work, that is your window. While everything is open and accessible, you pull that valve, you check its little screen for varnish and debris, and you drop in a fresh one. It is a few dollars in parts and a few extra minutes of labor when you are already in the neighborhood. The reason this part matters so much is that it sits right at the choke point. Every drop of oil that feeds the AFM lifter system passes through or past it. Clog the choke point, and it does not matter how clean the rest of your oil is. The lifters at the end of that line are starving. If this kind of straight, no-nonsense breakdown is saving you money, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I put out videos every week showing you the cheap fixes that prevent the expensive disasters dealerships are happy to let you walk into. Now, let me give you the fourth part, because this one is the wild card. Most people never connect to lifter failure at all. The fourth part is a fresh set of properly gapped, correct heat range spark plugs. And I know what you are thinking. What does a spark plug have to do with a collapsed lifter? Stay with me, because this is the kind of connection that 20 years under the hood teaches you. When a spark plug fouls or wears out on an AFM engine, that cylinder starts misfiring. A misfire on its own is bad enough, but on an AFM 5.3, the misfire often happens on a cylinder that is constantly cycling between active and deactivated states. That combination of incomplete combustion and AFM cycling dumps unburned fuel and creates extra carbon and heat exactly where you do not want it, around the rings and down into the oil. Fuel dilution thins out your oil. Thinned oil loses the viscosity those AFM lifters depend on, and now you are right back to inconsistent oil pressure at the lifters. A worn plug does not just cost you fuel economy. On this specific engine architecture, it quietly attacks the oil that keeps your lifters alive. A set of the correct AC Delco plugs runs you well under $40 for all 8, often closer to $30, and changing them on schedule keeps combustion clean, keeps fuel out of your oil, and keeps the whole AFM system breathing the way it should. People treat plugs as a tune-up afterthought. On a 5.3, they are part of your lifter protection plan. Think about how the fuel dilution problem snowballs, because this is the part that surprises even experienced guys. A slightly worn plug causes a slightly weak burn. That weak burn lets a little raw fuel slip past the rings and into the crankcase. Now, your oil is just a touch thinner than it should be. Thinner oil means slightly lower pressure at the AFM lifters, which makes the deactivation cycle a little less clean, which creates a little more carbon and a little more heat, which fouls the plug faster. Every step makes the next step worse. It is a loop that feeds on itself, and it can run for tens of thousands of miles, quietly degrading the exact oil quality your lifters live and die by, while you have no idea anything is wrong because the truck still drives fine. Fresh plugs on schedule break that loop before it ever starts spinning. That is why I refuse to treat them as just a fuel economy item on this engine. So let me put the whole picture back together, because the magic here is not any one part. It is how they work as a system. A quality oil filter keeps the AFM solenoids clean and holds pressure at startup. The correct Dexos full synthetic keeps oil viscosity in the window the lifters were engineered for and resists the sludge that clogs everything. A fresh pressure relief valve keeps the high-pressure oil feed to those lifters consistent and unobstructed, and a fresh set of plugs keeps combustion clean so fuel never dilutes the oil and undermines all three of the others. Every single one of those four parts protects the same thing from a different angle, and that thing is clean, consistent, correctly pressurized oil reaching the AFM lifters. That is the entire secret. Lifter failure on the 5.3 is not bad luck, and it is not a mystery. It is an oil delivery problem start to finish, and you can win that battle for under $40 in parts, plus a little discipline. Here is what I tell every 5.3 owner who comes through my shop worried about that dreaded tick. Stop waiting for it to get loud. Do the oil and filter on a tight 5,000-mile schedule with the genuine parts. Run only the Dexos synthetic in the right weight. Get that pressure relief valve sorted out next time the intake is off, and never let your plugs go past their interval. Do that, and the engine that the internet swears is a ticking time bomb will run past 250,000 miles without ever touching a lifter. I have seen it happen over and over. The trucks that fail are the ones that got the cheap filter, the bargain bin oil, and the neglected plugs. The trucks that live forever got $40 of the right parts and an owner who paid attention. And I want to leave you with one more thing, because there is a question I get constantly. People ask me whether they should just pay to have AFM deleted entirely. That is a real option, and there is a case for it, but I will tell you that the vast majority of 5.3 owners never need to go that far. The owners who keep their AFM systems alive for the long haul are not the ones who spent thousands on a delete. They are the ones who spent $40 on the right parts and stayed disciplined about when they installed them. The system can work. GM just built it with almost zero margin for sloppy maintenance, and then never bothered to tell the people buying these trucks how thin that margin really was. The manufacturers built an engine that needs precise oil management to survive, and then they sold it to millions of people without ever explaining that. The dealership is not going to tell you, because the teardown pays a lot better than prevention. But now you know. 4 parts, all under $40, and the difference between an engine that dies at 120,000 miles and one that runs forever. If this helped you understand your 5.3 a little better, hit that like button and subscribe for more honest breakdowns the dealership would rather you never see. Drop a comment and tell me how many miles are on your 5.3 right now. I read every single one. Take care of your engine, and it will take care of you. I will see you in the next one.